Awesome. Welcome everyone to is it our second transformative talk? Oh, our third. Did we done this 3 times? Okay, so welcome to our third transformative talks. Today we're going to talk a little bit about grind culture and grit. And one of the things that I really want to do is sort of look at it from a couple different perspectives. I want to look at it from our personal relationship with those two words, because to me, one basically can perpetuate the other. But I really want to talk about just our personal relationship with that. I want to talk about what that might look like with children, and each one of us is going to have a very different lens. My history is working with kids in crises. That's what I did my entire professional career outside of being a consultant. And then I want to take a look at the implications of what we bring as leaders into programs. And our lens is going to be uniquely different based on our life experiences, our values, our beliefs, our culture. All of those things play in to our perceptions. And I think it's important for us to really get a deep understanding of what those two things mean. But I want to begin with, just to start, I want to begin with an agreement from Ijima. What can we agree to today? What are we going to?
I'm thinking about pushing beyond binary thinking and holding the both and. I think that's going to be useful for this conversation.
You mean I'm not right?
What?
I'm not right? Come on now. That's not no.
Okay. Did we reject the agreement and vote again? I think there's tampering with this voting system.
No. Okay, you asked me to choose, and that's what I chose. We already agreed to that. No backseat.
So, Christy, ground us. What is
it? That's the binary.
What was that?
I said, since we're doing the binary, I'm going to suggest that we keep thinking about that Mobius strip. I don't know if you guys have seen that before when Parker Plummer does it, but it's this way you take a piece of paper and you twist it so that your inner circle, which is your inner experiences, and the outer part of the paper, which is your outer behavior, become one. So for the grounding today, I'd like to think about where is our inner and our outer out of alignment and how we can bring it to be in congruence. I don't know if that's grounding, but that's what I'm going to try to aim for, is think about inner experience and outer behavior being in congruence.
Awesome.
Okay,
so I want to begin with your relationship, your experience, your perceptions, and either one of you can go first, around grit and or grind culture. Because whatever comes to mind for you. What's your experience? What resonates with you? What speaks to you when you think of those two things?
So I think what comes up is like in ECE, early childhood education, this obsession around being on time and like schedules and like I used to have this joke with one of my co-teachers, like who's going to open, who's going to close. Like that was always the question, and figuring out, well, who's going to be here with the children. So thinking about being in systems where people don't feel like they can take off just to get a health checkup. What if like they show up 5 minutes late, like everything falls apart and people are angry and mad and like you should have been here. Thinking about when people go on breaks, like you were like 1 minute late coming back from your break. And how we police each other and how that is tied into that puritanical idea of the worth ethic, that you're working and you need to grind and do it all the time, and that work is your worth. That if you're not working really hard for, like, not even for the greater good, but usually just for your boss, then you don't really have worth. If you don't work for it, then like why should you have food or water or anything? So that's when it comes up. When those two words come up, that's what I'm thinking about.
Okay, so I know you were going to go next, Christy, but I have to jump in.
Okay, go ahead.
Because you said something, Adrian, and I was a director for 12 years. And so I had, at the time when I was a director, I had millennials, boomers, and Xers all working together, and traditionalists. I actually had, it was during the time where I still had traditionalists in the workforce. And so what happened, what you said, just, it reminded me of this situation. My boomers had this work ethic, and it was a generalized, it was my boomers, like literally them. They had this belief that if there was 5 minutes left on the clock, you need to like work to the very end. And one of the things my teachers used to do when they would clean the rooms in the evening is they would gather all the trash and toss it in the hallway. And then once they were done cleaning the room or whatever, they would pick it up and then throw it in the garbage, right? Well, my boomers would go around and pick everyone's trash up because they were on their way anyway. Well, my millennials didn't even think about that. Like they would just take their trash out. And so it started this undercurrent of resentment in my program because my boomers were like, they're sitting in the lounge, there's 15 minutes left, it's 185 degrees outside. My teachers were outside with kids all afternoon. I don't care that they're in the lounge drinking water and chilling with each other for 15 minutes. My boomers were livid. And then one day it felt, like it just blew up because it was that work ethic. It was that grind. You're getting paid for this time. How dare you sit around and do nothing? And we really had to come, what I call one of those come to Jesus moments where we had to let's say, where is this really coming from? Because, and I think we do that in our programs, in our systems. We create this experience where you have to do this, you're expected to do this, and we internalize it. And then what happens is when we're not doing it, guilt shows up, right? Or we start to go, we're not doing enough. It becomes an internalized perception. Okay, Christy, go ahead.
No, this is really helpful because what's really showing is the systemic nature of it. So I'll start from what Ijuma said about work ethic. So in my family growing up, you couldn't even watch TV unless you were doing something else that was work related. So you were ironing, or you were folding laundry, or you were balancing your checkbook. It doesn't matter. And even to this day, we tease my dad that he can't sit down and watch TV because you got the persona. Then on the heel of that, if you wanted to ever excuse for being late or for not having done something, as long as you were working, it was a free pass. So it was this idea that work, no offense again, trumped everything. Okay. And so that persona, that belief, as you said, Isela, carries into then how I see my colleagues and then how I interact with my colleagues. And then I would say the worst outcome is how I view children and how I look at how they spend their days. And so when you brought up this topic and I was thinking about grit and I was thinking about grind culture, I thought about kids' IEP goals. And just yesterday, I was with a team, and my colleague Julie invited everyone on the team to talk about a celebration that they had with this second grader. And almost every response was, she's following directions more. She's more responsive to our directions. She's more compliant. Whatever way you want to shape it, she's able to do her work more independently. She's on task more often than she's not. And I was like, oh, but is that what we want to celebrate?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we do, because we want to celebrate compliance, right? Because in this work ethic, it's important that you're compliant to the rules, to your boss, to authority. So yeah, that's the goal, and that's what we want to celebrate.
And I feel
and not celebrate children being curious or children being funny. The kids that are always labeled bad, they have the best sense of humor. Like they are some funny children,
Well, and I
right?
feel like
And
it's like,
nobody ever brings that up.
it's what perpetuates what, Bettina Love was talking about in terms of like survival. That's all we're doing is like giving kids skills that they can survive in school, which is just really a mirror of society. And
Mm-hmm.
so the policing that you talked about, the judgment, the values, and it's all about survival.
I,
Yes.
I think for me, it goes a little bit into how we perceive children. Um, there's historically in education, and I've done the 0 to 5 sector most of my professional career. And in the last 5 years, I really worked in the K-3 realm, which is a whole different ballgame, really, it is. And my perceptions have been that um, in that world, well, let me back up a little bit. I want to go into, before I go there, I want to go into grit.
Okay.
Okay. And Carol Dweck, not Carol Dweck, Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. I have to tell you that I read it back like when it first came out. I think
Yeah.
it's like 2018. So I'm not at all an expert, but I talk a lot about perseverance. And I talk a lot about passion in the work that I do, because I think it's super important for us to support perseverance. But the issue is that historically in education, we come from the do to a child model. So when you were talking about when people were reflecting about what growth or what they want to share about this
Celebrate.
child, it's what they did to the child. It's like, look what we accomplished
Yeah.
by, right? I intervened and I created
Yeah.
this outcome, and look at how wonderful I am,
Yeah.
right?
We taught her to do this and we
Right.
taught her to do that. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
look at how amazing that is. Instead of looking from the spirit of the child, right? And understanding who the child is and celebrating the whole self. Like that's, but I think in 0 to 5, there have been a camp that have done that for a very long time. We've been fighting for that for a long time. In the K-3 realm, the focus hasn't been the spirit of the child. The focus hasn't been who the child really is. The focus has been accountability. It has been, how are we doing to children, right? Because if we don't do hard enough and well enough, they're not going to succeed.
Yeah.
And that when we look at, one of the things I want to share about my experience with grit and grind culture is I come from migrant workers. So my mom was a migrant worker, my entire mom's side of the family, and my family traveled between states. And on my dad's side of the family, I'm first American here in the United States. My dad was born in Sonora, Mexico. And so my family came from that space of you work hard, right? You work hard. And that perception for me, now as an adult, I look back and I see they've all worked hard. They're still working hard, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they haven't been able, they're still living paycheck to paycheck. They're still struggling, right? But it's that perception that in order for you to do good, you have to put blood, sweat, and tears out there. And the perception that you have to be twice as good and you have to work twice as hard. What that does is it slowly kills us because we believe that that's the only way we're going to make it. And the system perpetuates that, right? And so when I remember even my doctoral program, they do this: look to the right, look to the left. One or both of you aren't going to be sitting here at the end of the program. Say goodbye to your family, say goodbye to your life, say goodbye to everything, because that's the only way you're going to make it. And so as a director of a program, I brought that in. That was honestly my lens. My lens was, like Ijuma said, when somebody called out, I'm like, okay, how sick are you really? Does your foot need to be amputated? Because if it doesn't, I need you here today. I did that. I know I did that. Because I'm like, I'm going to have to drive the bus again. That was my freak out. And so I think that we've adopted this and what it looks like for children. And this is where we really have to get real with it, I think. And then you guys can talk, because I'm talking too much. I'm passionate about this. Grit, I think for me, what it looks like is pull your bootstraps up. And that's not the intent of grit. It's like you need to learn because life is hard. You need to learn this way. You need to pull your big girl panties up and push forward. And that's the way I'm seeing it conveyed with the older kids. And I see it. And Dr. Bettina Love says grit is in the DNA of African Americans. And it's like, how dare we sit and try to do two children, right? How dare we do that? Because so many children come with grit. So many children, I mean, I think they all do. It's for us to do with rather than do two children. Okay, go. What are your thoughts about that?
Do you want to go, Christy?
No, you go ahead if you want.
So I'm thinking about, like, Isalla's reflecting back on her migrant worker background. And that's the same, like working twice as hard for half as much. And like, oh, you have to work. And what no one ever says is that the American dream is a lie, right?
Yeah, totally.
Like moving up the class stratosphere, like you don't get that. Yeah. Like you're poor, especially in nowadays, like your children will probably be poor. Like the hardest working people are poor people, right? Because you have to put up and do a lot of work and get a low pay. Mm-hmm. And so you can't like really afford living paycheck to paycheck. And it doesn't matter how hard you work, how much you give, like it's just going to kill you the stress and the unreasonable rules and requirements. And then you work really hard and then you're dead. Mm-hmm. Right? And who does that benefit? Yeah. Like it's benefiting our white dominant culture. It's benefiting upholding white supremacy. That's who is benefiting. Yeah. And so it's going to be important that we understand that because it is what we offer back to children in education. Because we tell children, like, if you get a good education, then you can be somebody, then you're worth something. And so how that looks in ECE, especially in communities of color and Black Indigenous communities, of like this academic stuff. Like, oh, it's no time to play. Like you have to have academics so you can make it into K-12 and be successful. And then, you can go to college and like get the American dream. But that isn't true. The system is working very hard against you. And we don't want children just to survive it. We want an education system that children thrive in, that children can be their whole self, that their spirit, like Dr. Bettina Love, we're going to say her name a whole bunch of times, I guess. Like, we don't want that spirit murdering to happen. And that's what our system is doing. And that's the reality of it. And it's not by accident, right? We didn't just kind of like wake up. Like the education system, especially for children of color, Black Indigenous children, were to keep them poor, to keep them working class, to fit the capitalist model, and for them never to have their own. But to have the lie that, oh, if you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, then you're going to make it. That's just a lie. And having academics, quote unquote academics, in ECE isn't going to save our children. Respectability, if we just assimilate, like none of that is going to help us. Yeah. What's going to help us, like we talk about, you brought up the NAP ministry, like what's going to help us is being able to have rest, relaxation, and fun, like to be in the joy of living and offering that, like with children and with families, that's through play. And so if we're committed to letting go of grind culture, to letting go of a deficit model of grit, then we have to go back to the places where we let children be children and have that joy of childhood, that we don't try to make them assimilate into a system that's just trying to kill them and get them out and punish them. So we have to do not like either or. It's not like academics or play. Like we offer play and support them in being resilient, being problem solvers, being critical thinkers. Like all of those things happen for them to have, like being community minded helps them be the good citizens that I hope that education should be about.
And, I was thinking, Jim, there's so many things you said that are the parallel for students with what we would call disabilities. And it's how society, as we talk about the medical model and the social model of disability. And in a social model, it says, hey, society is creating barriers that disable you. And so now we've said, here's a line in the sand, and you fall on the wrong side of the sand, and you can't maybe pull your own bootstraps up. So we're going to put you on, on this plan, an IEP, and we're going to work you harder. Teachers, again, just the other day, were like, they're not getting enough special ed. They're not getting enough direct instruction. They're not getting enough time with me. They're spending too much time in the general curriculum. And I'm like, what is too much time in the general curriculum, right? And they're like, we're not going to do a service to them if we don't front load all these skills that they have to learn to then work in a low paying job that's undervalued. Or are we going to teach them how to have friendships and foster friendships? And so I just really kept thinking about how the grit mentality and the grind culture plays out in how we perceive disability, the value of people who are neurodiverse, and then what we do to try to remediate and fix instead of celebrate and support.
Because it's not the children that's the problem, it's the system that's the problem.
I think, yes, I agree with the system being the problem, but I think having grown up in the system, right, we're deeply influenced by it, and then we continue to do what's always been done because we're not questioning it, right? And I think that's, you brought up a couple things. You said college readiness, and even kindergarten readiness, and in terms of grit, and what's the term that's often used? I can't remember the term that's often used in the KP world, but the perception, lots of stuff going on. That idea of college readiness or even kindergarten readiness. We lost Ijima.
Yeah, we'll find her again.
Okay. I think that perception is, I think it's completely inaccurate, and I wish we would stop saying to children that you are college bound and that's what you should do. I'm having issues with my AC right now. Got a fan blowing on me. I'm in Arizona where it's still 108 degrees. I need someone to be able to come fix my air conditioning unit. There is nothing wrong with these types of positions and jobs. We have this perception, or one school that I work with had like college names on every one of their buildings. And so it was like the Stanford building, the Harvard building, and this is a Title IX. Is that what it? Yeah, I think that's what it is. And it was a school in a very, very, there were a lot of gangs in this neighborhood for many years. And so their perception is the way that they are changing this is to make everyone college bound. And again, it's that perception of doing to and being the savior of, right? And that's the thing that we looking at a child from that whole child lens. And what I find really interesting, because I have worked with kids in crisis for a long time, right now there's so much emphasis in terms of adults around self-care, right? Around self-care and recognizing when you're feeling overwhelmed and what to do, take a day of rest, really pay attention to your body. But we don't do that with children. We don't start teaching children or approaching children from that place of taking care of their own individual needs.
And I would push it even further that we're asking teachers to notice that they're overwhelmed without looking at the institution that is actually oppressing and overwhelming them. So we're asking them to not only operate and live and work in that environment, but to have enough grit to stand up against the oppression and take a day off. I don't know. You're so right that we're maybe asking adults to do it and not asking children or starting young enough, but we're also still just asking adults even leaders. We're asking leaders to do all this amazing stuff within systems of oppression. So that's
Yeah.
that's
Like we're just asking them to do self-care so they can come back to
to
work, right?
right.
No one's saying, take a vacation, but we'll see you next year, right?
It's just
Or when
well
you
enough
feel
that you
ready.
can come
Like
back.
they're like, oh, take 24 hours or just take the weekend. Maybe not grade papers over the weekend. Maybe do that. And then come back to work on Monday. Like, we'll see you at 9:00. Thank you.
But it's still that idea too. Like, how many schools are you guys in right now that people are still prepping kids for assessments? Like, we are still in a global pandemic, folks.
Yep.
We are not doing well with this home hybrid school. Sometimes school, no, not school. Yet we're still going to say, if I say to a teacher, "What's your lesson plan next week?" It's like, "Oh, well, we're prepping for the test." That's all still a mentality of grit and grind.
Well, let me tell you, one of the things that I got really excited about when all of this kind of came down is all the things that we said we couldn't do for children, we did, right? We got computers for kids, we got internet for kids, we got, right, all of that stuff.
But why
there was no money for blah, 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 right? But here's the thing, the excitement for me was that some of the teachers I was working with had the opportunity to start to plan for children, like creatively plan for children and do things differently than what they were doing in the classroom. Because it's harder. I'm not going to lie, it's easier, but it's harder to figure out how to do it this way. But it gave some school districts gave them freedom because nobody knew what they were doing. They're like trying to, do something. And then I heard recently, there are a couple schools that I'm not in relationship with, just heard from teachers, that the district had created a curriculum that they had to use in their distant learning approach. What kind of shit is that? It's like, what is okay, I'm trying not to do that on this page.
That's okay. It's PG-13. I forgot to be rating up.
I need a little blurb for me.
Yeah, we'll just call it the shitty kind of shit.
But really, it's like, here's the opportunity that we need to reach kids for who they are. Why are we caring about the assessment? Why are we caring about, like, seriously, why can't we just get that?
Because it's tied to our worth, right?
Yeah.
We're good teachers when we get good scores on assessment because we've internalized that message, right? Teachers, like, I've been in meetings, directors blame teachers when they don't have a good enough assessment score. Oh, we did poorly. We got to raise these scores, right? And ECE and pre-K, like in any developmental assessment tool, like, oh, not enough kids are getting a 5 or a 4. And, and then when you get to K through 12, then it's testing, right? Because teachers are like, oh, this is what makes me a good teacher.
Yeah,
this is
but
what the system says I should be doing.
Which kids aren't getting good scores? Let's go one step further.
Yeah.
In our perception of tests made by white people with let's just say testing companies are dictating the curriculum and the assessments. The policies are made by we know who, all the way down. Now the teacher internalizes that this is their worth. They're also white, able. And now we're saying, oh, who's not doing well? Oh, who's got the gap? Who do we have to work harder at to close the gap versus saying, why is there a gap? Or how can we best capitalize upon these students' strengths that they already brought with them? I don't know. It's just the whole testing part is just going to make me lose my mind. Oh, Jim, I can't hear you.
We lost her again.
All right, Isola, let's try again.
All right, we are on again. This is part 2. We have no idea what happened. So we're just going to pretend that this was all scheduled. So part 2. Okay. So we were talking about, actually, Ijima, you said something. I have no idea, like, what people heard and what people didn't hear because I kept rambling. So I'm going to talk. I think I went on about, value of worth. You talked about the value of worth. And I will tell you that I came from that same perspective. That has deeply influenced me until the last probably 10 years. I was like, my doctorate was because I was trying to prove myself to my family and to others that I was worthy of something, worthy of love, worthy of being enough, worthy. That's all my doctorate was. And when my husband, because when I was 18, that was like the thing that I wanted to accomplish, right? I wrote a list of things. That was my final thing. And I said to my husband, when I graduate, you're going to call me doctor. That's all you're going to call me. Because in my head, it was like, that was the value of my worth, right? I accomplished, I made something of myself. My family, I was in school for 26 years. My family were like, Mija, why are you in school still? Like, and my nana thought I was like trying to be a medical doctor. So she's like, Mija, I need a prescription. I'm like, I can't give you a prescription.
I'm not that kind of doctor.
There was no, they didn't have an understanding of why I was killing myself. And it was because I was reaching for that. And when I finally got it, I realized not a damn thing happened.
All that grit and grind and nothing.
Yeah, it was the grit, the perseverance, the saying goodbye to my family, the working, 80 hours a week, just pushing out, juggling balls. And here's the hard thing for me to admit right now is I had the expectation of others around me to do the same thing. Yeah. Like I looked at people like, what's wrong with you? What do you mean you can't work past 10? What do you mean? I'm like texting my employees at like 1 a.m. Where's that document? I totally did that. And so it's something that I grew up with thinking that was a good thing. And then what happens, right? To our detriment, right? Yeah. And I think that message we say to children all the time, work harder. That perseverance, you have to push through. And I think that we lose sight of the soul of the child, the spirit of the child completely.
Well, and I think a lot of times perseverance and other things like that are like the ability to problem solve or to try it a different way or see it from a different perspective versus just stay at it no matter what. That mentality of like, I said it, so I have to keep that in my mind forever, or I started it, so I have to finish it, even with evidence that this is not good. It's like the things you really want. And so I wanted to ask you guys about not just grit, but I'm going to say a few other words. Because when people talk about like grit or mindfulness or even SEL as being part of the white dominant culture, I always go, oh, okay. I kind of like those words. Well, yes, of course, because they're part of the white dominant culture. Get it. I'm going to read 7 words from you guys. Do you guys know this book? I can't do it backwards. Yeah. Okay. So before you tell me your opinion, because I know y'all have one. So Bettina Love said, why don't we focus on creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication? So she had 4 C's, and she said creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication, kind of together instead of grit. Then there's this, Ellen Galinsky's work around the 7 essentials of life skills. And I thought, what do I think of those with this lens of, the white dominant culture and society creating barriers around ability? So focus and self-control. And I was like, perspective taking. Okay. Communicating, making connections, critical thinking, taking on challenges, self-directed, engaged learning. I kind of ended up going, it's a little bit of both. I don't know. What do y'all think of that? Because this is the stuff we also tell teachers to focus on.
You want to go first?
Go ahead, Isela.
Well, I think when I talk, those C's are a big deal these days. Critical. I would add community to that sense of community. But I think that that's really speaking to the whole child. But this is where I get afraid.
Okay.
Because that lens of doing 2 children, we're going to teach you how to.
Right.
As opposed to how do I do this and be in union with the child to support who they are as an individual. This is that idea of who am I in the presence of children, that I come in open-hearted and I come in understanding who I am. I come in being reflective of my experiences, my actions, my perceptions, and what I bring to the table in relationship with the children, that I help them and that I'm there as a guide. That's it. I'm there as a guide. I'm not there to teach to children in the way that I think we get in our mindset. Like I have to teach them communication. I have to teach them. I have to teach, and it's really at a teaching at them is basically probably better than to them is what I'm trying to get to. And it often comes from, Ijma, you said this, that deficit model. I call this lack in my head because I think that it's not just about children, it's about a lot of things. That when I come from the lens of not enough, that's really a reflection of me, right? And I feel like that model really becomes a part of the lens we see a lot of things through. And so those are my initial thoughts. Yours, Ijima?
Yeah, I think that is not like an either or binary.
Okay.
Right. And like you're thinking about Dr. Bettina and the woman, Ellen Galinsky, like they're not coming from the same, they're not talking about the same things, even when they're using the same words, right? Yeah. They have different orientations. And so I think like that's what should be discussed, and understanding that while Dr. Bettina is very clear about she's trying to move out of a white dominant narrative, that remind me of her name again. Ellen is firmly in that and trying to support figuring out how to work within that system.
Really helpful.
And so I think we spend a lot of time trying to deny that our education system and our thought leaders are coming from a white dominant perspective, right? And the system upholds that. So that's why it seems like they're saying like really innovative and great things, because it's just supporting the system. And who's not really listened to are the people that are speaking from a different orientation, from a different cultural norm, and prioritizing that instead of the white dominant culture. And that is not just like individual, because like I can change, like I can like give up like the grit and the grind culture, right? But I still have to do work to dismantle the system that supports it. It's a both and. Because like people are mad at me all the time because I'm like, this isn't really urgent. I'm going to take a nap and I'm not going to work, right? Because a lot of like it's coming up now, like in this pandemic, and because we're virtual, like people like forget, or I don't know if they forget, like I'm on the East Coast and they want like 8:00 Eastern time meetings. And like people really like want me to get up at 5:00 in the morning to present and to work with them. And it's like, what? Like you have, like, you know where I am, you know, like I'm not coming there to be there at 8:00. So we have to negotiate that time. And they're like, no, why can't you just get up and be here with us at 8:00 in the morning? Our time.
Our time.
Yeah, I think it's the system. And what's wrong with you, right? What's wrong with you because you're not doing what needs to be done? Don't you need a paycheck?
Yeah.
Right?
I do. And but at what cost? But like I've have enough privilege, and like I'll sacrifice. Like maybe, you know, we don't have steak and shrimp this week.
Right.
Like
I get up at 5 a.m.
Like, okay, I'll just, you know, buy an extra bag of beans for the next couple of weeks. Because I said no, like there is consequences.
Right.
And like them being mad and them saying, well, Ijima is unprofessional. Right? Because I didn't meet their expectation around my worth ethic and that grind culture.
So let's talk about I don't think I'm alone in this. You know, I really have spent, like I said, the last about 10 years really starting to focus on what my body needs and the reasons why I have been so in this grind culture. And then, like I said, have the expectation from everyone else around me to work as hard, because that's the only way we're going to be, good at what we do. So for folks who are working with children, who are administrators, leaders, what now? Like, okay, that is me. That's what I do. That's what I've done with my staff. I'm in the classroom. I'm having these experiences with children. What now? What would you say would be some ways to help folks be more reflective and start to create some changes? Because I think part of what you were saying, Jama, is an important thing. It's like we can do all of these things, but how are we shifting the system, right? So maybe even look at those two different things. What might that look like?
So I think like just choosing one thing, like because it can feel overwhelmed to like give up a whole way of being and a way of being that felt productive and good, right? And so maybe it's working on our own mindset around that binary. Like if I'm lazy, I'm bad or sinful or whatever judgment we have around that. If I'm not being productive, thinking about our worth, and then thinking about, well, where in the system I'm in can I shift that? And so thinking about what am I rewarding, what am I acknowledging with my staff, and how can it be
Oh no.
and
Oh, there
talking.
you go. Okay.
Hello?
Yeah. Keep talking.
Oh. Like how can I start to notice and acknowledge like when people are cooperative, right? When people are rise up for someone else and like have their back, when can I do that? When can I talk about, um how can I look at like seeing who's taking vacation, who's taking time off? Like, do I have staff that hasn't taken vacation, right, in like 3-4 years? Like, how can I support and making sure and create a culture that like everyone takes breaks? How can I look at our schedule, like our big school, our year-long schedule, our daily schedule, to making sure that everyone is taking a break and the day's doing slower. Like a lot of times I tell people the
Oh no, did we lose? Oh,
She's back. We're waiting for you.
I don't know what's going on today with my internet.
Well, maybe you didn't work enough and you didn't pay your bill.
So if you would like to send me
Go fund Juma so she can sleep in. So that we can have a transformative talk without interruption. But you know what, Jimmy, you're going to say something important, but I wanted to ask you something.
Go
Because
ahead.
I know I'm guilty of this, of all of these things we're all talking about. How do you split out? Okay, and I know we got to wrap up, so I don't mean to start a new thing, but like, how do you split up? Like, let's say you love your work and you just want to do more.
Yeah.
And then how do you split out, like, because let's say we're collaborating and I love my work and I want to do a whole lot of work. How do I not suck you into my vortex in a way that makes you have to keep putting up boundaries after boundaries because I'm oblivious that I'm sucking you in? I mean, this is a true life story, as you know. So like, how do we help? Like, I guess that's what I'm thinking is like, when you said, look at our schedules, I'm trying to think about how do we still acknowledge that some people really do want to work or like to work, or I don't know what that means really. And, or how do we do it so that we aren't, for people who are setting boundaries and to people who are trying to take a nap, we don't keep, I don't know, I've got a couple ideas in my head that aren't clear.
Yeah, I think it's just messy, right? Like it's life and living with people and like honoring other people's rhythms.
Yeah.
And thinking about like, and when they set that boundary, like don't take it personally. Like, okay. And maybe it's like, oh, well, maybe I should like chill out too.
She's telling me something.
And
Because
so
that's all I take
everything
it personally.
isn't urgent.
And then I write you again. Well, because in my mind, everything's urgent, you know?
I remember that. There's a recovery model for that, Christy.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah. Send
I
me
did
that.
because I lived that for a really long time. It really was
Yeah.
about what I can accomplish. You know, I wanted things to look good. I wanted to represent myself in a way that, you know, that I knew, you know, that what I was talking about. It was all about, you know, presentation and product and grinding. And I even had a mug that said something like, you know, I'm on my grind. I celebrated that shit.
Well, I even think about that. Like, I love Michael Franti, but his big mantra is work hard. And I keep thinking, I don't know. Even I don't like that. And I work hard.
Like I already work hard. I don't need any reminders.
Yeah, I need someone yelling at me about it. Anyway, so
And
I
I
love that idea about my takeaway is going to be check my schedule itself and really start looking at what is urgent. When am I projecting to the world that there is a sense of urgency that's not really there, and how I can just space things a little bit more. So that's, thank you, Jim. I'm going to take that away. Isela, how about you? What would your suggestions to us be? Because I know you've been working hard on this personally, but how do we help our teachers?
You know, one of the things that Ijma said about how we engage with you know, you said, was there a teacher who hasn't taken a vacation? I had a teacher who hadn't taken a vacation. She was from the Midwest, and they're like workhorses. Not to be stereotypical, but everyone I hired from Minnesota, boy, they were like, I'm like, you're from Minnesota, you're hired. You're hired. And she didn't take a vacation like ever. And she was there at, you know, 6 a.m, and she worked hard till 2 o'clock. She did what she needed. And what happened? We celebrated that. You know, it was like we like in our language, how we engaged with one another. She was reliable. It's the same thing we do with kids. Oh, you're always so friendly. You're always so kind. And that becomes their perception of self. And so then what happens is when they need a break, they don't take it. They don't ask for it because they've created this idea of who they should be in the world, right? And to change that can be very hard for some people. And I have to tell you that she passed away about 2 years after I left. I mean, she literally, she died. I mean, she just was gone, and she was only in her 40s. And so I always think back to her experience and now that I'm really reflective of sort of, because in childcare, you know, we talk about the domino effect, you know, like someone calls out, who's going to cover in this classroom, who's going to cover who's going to drive the bus, and like everything has to shift in order to accommodate the day. And I was so wrapped up in that as a leader that it really took intentional practice for me to actually say, how are you today? Like, you know, how are you feeling about this? Especially because I work with kids in crisis.
Yeah.
So it was like, we got to be what they need.
Yeah. And how much were you focusing on what Ijima said? Rest, relaxing, and joy. You weren't. It was.
Yeah, we did, but it was scheduled. We did a lot of celebrations. We did rituals. We did things like that. But it was very much like, because I believe in the parallel process. You do unto others as you want them to do unto others. Like I really, that was clear in my programs. But it was also very much, the focus was always the kids. We're doing it for the kids, right? Which is, now in hindsight, I should have spent more time with really connecting wholeheartedly with the grown-ups.
All right, so that's it for grit and grind. Let's just kick them to the curb, bury them.
Yeah. And in this virtual space, we have this opportunity to actually do that.
Yeah,
right? You
totally.
don't have to be online and in Zoom meetings. Like I just shared a tweet about Zoom fatigue, and like you don't have to go to every happy hour and every, you know,
I don't do happy hours on Zoom. Really? No one's inviting me.
Oops. Awkward.
Well, some people might need a couple to attend. So if you know it's something, put it in the chat, put it in the comments. But you don't have to do Zoom and be on video chat and do all of that all day.
Yeah.
Like you can have a break.
And I think giving ourselves permission and like me, because I come from that, is I need to allow that to be okay for myself. You know,
Yep.
that grind culture, that if I'm not, what you were saying, Christy, you know, watching TV while working on something else, that I don't have to be busy all of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's okay. I'm still worthy. I'm still enough. I'm still all of those things.
I'm going to say that's for children too, as we wrap up, is that sometimes they can just be daydreaming. Sometimes they can be just spacing off. Sometimes they can be doing something really what looks to be unproductive. I don't know. I just feel like as I talk to schools about kids' schedules and like, well, we don't have enough instructional time, so we're going to reduce outdoor time or recess or lunch because we've got to have more instructional time. And then we spend all this energy to say we're going to bring you humans to a brick and mortar space during a pandemic. It's so important we're together. And then we're going to turn on the smart TV and do a lesson. And I'm like, what the is that about? In a kindergarten classroom, you're going to drag these little kids during a pandemic to a central room, and then you're going to watch YouTube? No offense, YouTube, because thanks for broadcasting this. But, you know, like really? Okay, so that's another whole story. But I'm going to focus more on rest, relaxing, and joy. And I'm going to notice when I am sucking people into my vortex of the white dominant culture. What are you going to take your way? What's your takeaway, girls?
I thought I did mine already. Yours
Did you?
Yeah, I
good?
think like I'm gonna just continue to nap and not get up at 5 o'clock in the morning.
That's a good pledge. I pledge to not get up at 5 a.m. and take daily naps. All right. So till next time.
Thank you, everyone, for
Thank
attending
you, everyone.
and being patient. We appreciate you.
Yep.